June 22, 1941. The morning sun burned across the Ukrainian steppe near Dubno as Oberleutnant Hans von Luck's reconnaissance unit spotted movement through the wheat fields. Dark shapes materialized through the heat shimmer, low-slung silhouettes with sloped armor, unlike anything in German tactical manuals. The lead tank rolled forward with mechanical confidence, its Christie suspension absorbing terrain irregularities that would have slowed German panzers. Von Luck raised his field glasses and felt his stomach tighten. The recognition was immediate and unsettling. Soviet T-34 medium tanks, roughly a dozen of them, advancing in a loose formation that suggested their crews understood this machine's capabilities. What happened in the next 17 minutes would shatter every assumption German tank crews held about armoured warfare on the Eastern Front. The engagement at Dubno represented just one of hundreds of similar encounters during the opening weeks of Operation Barbarossa, where German forces, equipped with what they believed was Europe's finest armoured equipment, discovered they faced a Soviet tank that rendered much of their anti-tank arsenal nearly obsolete. The 37mm and 50mm guns that had proven adequate against French and British tanks in 1940 bounced harmlessly off T-34 armour at ranges where those same German guns should have achieved decisive penetration. The psychological shock of this discovery rippled through Wehrmacht tank battalions and anti-tank units across the entire Eastern Front, forcing tactical adaptations, doctrinal changes, and urgent equipment modifications that would shape German armour development for the remainder of the war. The story of how German forces eventually developed effective countermeasures to the T-34 begins not with the famous 88mm anti-aircraft gun pressed into emergency anti-tank service, but with the desperate realization that Germany had entered the largest land war in history, inadequately prepared to defeat the primary Soviet medium tank. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The T-34's design lineage traced directly to Soviet experience during the Spanish Civil War, where military advisors observed tank combat under conditions that would prove remarkably predictive of future warfare. Soviet designers noted that Republican forces equipped with Soviet BT-5 fast tanks and T-26 infantry tanks suffered disproportionate losses when engaging nationalist forces supported by German anti-tank guns. The 37mm PaK-36 anti-tank gun, standard German equipment supplied to nationalist forces, proved devastatingly effective against Soviet tanks with vertical armor plates. Engineer Mikhail Koshkin, chief designer at Kharkov Locomotive Factory No. 183, studied after-action reports from Spain with particular attention to armor penetration data and engagement ranges. His analysis identified three critical vulnerabilities in existing Soviet tank designs. First, vertical armor maximized the effectiveness of German anti-tank shells by presenting perpendicular impact angles. Second, gasoline engines created catastrophic fire hazards when penetrated. Third, narrow tracks limited mobility across soft terrain common throughout the Soviet Union. Koshkin's design team began work on what would become the T-34 inches 1937, incorporating lessons from Spanish combat into every major system. The armor scheme used heavily sloped plates, with the glacis plate angled at 60 degrees from vertical, creating effective thickness far exceeding the nominal 45mm rolled homogeneous armor. At that angle, a 45mm thick plate presented an effective thickness of 90mm to shells, striking head-on, more than doubling protection without adding proportional weight. The V2 diesel engine, though initially troublesome and difficult to manufacture at scale, eliminated the gasoline fire hazard that had destroyed so many Soviet tanks in Spain. Diesel fuel required higher temperatures to ignite, meaning penetrating hits that would have caused gasoline-powered tanks to erupt in flames often resulted in survivable damage in diesel-powered vehicles. The wide tracks, measuring 500mm compared to 360mm on most German tanks, distributed weight across larger surface areas, dramatically reducing ground pressure and improving mobility in mud, snow, and soft sand. These design choices represented fundamental departures from contemporary tank design philosophy, Most nations, including Germany, prioritized firepower and mechanical refinement over survivability and reliability. The T-34 reversed these priorities, accepting increased mechanical simplicity, reduced crew comfort, and less sophisticated fire control systems in exchange for exceptional armor protection, adequate firepower through its 76.2mm gun, and reliable mechanical performance under harsh conditions. The prototypes underwent brutal testing through the winter of 1939 to 1940. Koshkin personally supervised a demonstration march from Kharkov to Moscow and back, covering nearly 3,000 kilometers through late winter conditions that destroyed roads and turned unpaved routes into rivers of mud. The tanks completed the journey with minimal mechanical failures, proving their automotive reliability exceeded existing Soviet designs by substantial margins. Stalin approved production in December 1939, though manufacturing quality problems would plague early production runs. By June 1941, when Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, Soviet factories had produced approximately 1,200 T-34 tanks. This represented a tiny fraction of total Soviet armor strength, which numbered over 22,000 tanks of all types. Most Soviet armored units still operated older designs, including BT-5 and BT-7 fast tanks, T-26 infantry tanks, and various light tank models. These vehicles, adequate against the weak anti-tank weapons available during the Spanish Civil War, proved catastrophically vulnerable to improved German anti-tank guns of 1941. German intelligence had failed to detect the T-34's existence before the invasion. Captured documents and interrogated prisoners provided fragmentary information about new Soviet tank designs under development, but nothing prepared Wehrmacht tankers for encountering vehicles that their standard anti-tank weapons could not defeat. The 37mm FlaK-36, backbone of German anti-tank defenses, achieved maximum penetration of 45mm at 100 meters at 0 degrees obliquity. Against the T-34's sloped frontal armor with its effective thickness of 90mm, these shells bounced off harmlessly at virtually any range. The 50mm FlaK-38, a more powerful weapon deployed in growing numbers through 1941, could penetrate 60mm at 500 meters at 0 degrees obliquity. This represented meaningful improvement against older Soviet tanks, but remained inadequate against T-34 frontal armor, except at extremely close ranges below 100 meters, ranges at which the T-34's 76.2mm gun could destroy any German tank or anti-tank position with a single well-placed shot. The tactical implications were severe and immediate. German anti-tank crews trained to engage enemy armor at ranges from 500 to 800 meters, distances that allowed defensive positions to destroy attacking tanks before they could close to effective direct fire range. The T-34 rendered this doctrine obsolete. Anti-tank guns that should have stopped Soviet attacks from comfortable distances found themselves forced to hold fire until T-34 seconds closed, within 100 meters, by which time supporting Soviet infantry and the tank's own machine guns suppressed German positions effectively. The Panzer III, Germany's primary medium tank in 1941, mounted either a 37mm or 50mm main gun, neither capable of defeating T-34 frontal armor except at point-blank range. The Panzer IV, originally designed as an infantry support vehicle, carried a short-barreled 75mm gun, firing high-explosive shells, effective against fortifications, but inadequate against heavily armored targets. German tank crews suddenly found themselves outgunned, out-armored, and frequently outmaneuvered by Soviet medium tanks they hadn't known existed. The engagement at Dubno on June 22 exemplified the tactical crisis. Von Luck's unit, equipped with Panzer III tanks mounting 50mm guns, attempted textbook anti-tank tactics. They established hull-down positions, taking advantage of terrain for cover and concealment. They waited for Soviet tanks to advance into killing zones, where concentrated fire could achieve decisive effects. They executed fire discipline, allowing T-34 seconds to close before engaging to maximize penetration probability. None of it mattered. The first volley of 50mm armor-piercing shells struck T-34 glacis plates and bounced away, leaving visible impact marks but achieving 0 penetrations. The Soviet tanks, apparently undamaged and certainly operational, returned fire with their 76.2mm guns. The first German Panzer III exploded as a Soviet shell penetrated its frontal armor, detonated the ammunition storage, and killed the entire crew instantly. The second German tank suffered a turret hit that jammed the traverse mechanism and wounded the gunner. The third attempted to withdraw but threw a track while reversing at high speed, immobilizing itself. Von Luck ordered his remaining tanks to retreat, abandoning the immobilized vehicle and breaking contact before Soviet infantry supporting the T-34 seconds could envelop his position. The engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. German forces lost 3 Panzer IIIs destroyed or abandoned, with 7 crew members killed and 4 wounded. Soviet forces reported no T-34 losses, though at least 2 tanks suffered superficial damage from shell impacts that failed to penetrate. This pattern repeated across the entire front during the first weeks of Barbarossa. German after-action reports from June and July 1941 document hundreds of encounters where standard anti-tank weapons proved ineffective against T-34 and KV-1 heavy tanks. The psychological impact on German forces was profound and immediate. Troops trained to believe in the superiority of German equipment and tactics suddenly faced enemy weapons they could not defeat with their issued equipment. Tank crews accustomed to engaging enemy armor confidently from standard ranges found themselves forced into desperate close-range maneuvers, attempting to achieve flank shots, the only engagement geometry that reliably defeated T-34 armor with available weapons. The crisis demanded immediate responses at multiple levels. Tactical adaptations came first, as unit commanders developed procedures for engaging T-34 seconds with inadequate weapons. These included concentration of fire from multiple anti-tank guns simultaneously, attempting to achieve mobility kills by targeting tracks and running gear, close assault by infantry teams using magnetic mines and satchel charges, and calling for artillery or air support, rather than attempting direct engagement with anti-tank guns. None of these represented satisfactory solutions. Concentrating fire revealed multiple anti-tank positions simultaneously, enabling Soviet return fire to destroy several guns in rapid succession. Mobility kills merely immobilized tanks that could continue fighting as improvised pillboxes until destroyed or abandoned. Infantry close. Assault against tanks supported by infantry resulted in prohibitive casualties. Artillery and air support took time to coordinate and often arrived too late to influence immediate tactical situations. The 88mm FlaK 36 anti-aircraft gun provided the only immediately available weapon capable of reliably defeating T-34 frontal armor. The 88mm gun, designed primarily for anti-aircraft work, could fire armor-piercing shells achieving 110mm of penetration at 1,000 meters at 0 degrees obliquity. Against the T-34's effective frontal armor thickness of 90mm, this meant reliable penetration at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, restoring the tactical advantage German anti-tank doctrine required. However, the 88mm gun came with severe limitations as an anti-tank weapon. The FlaK 36 weighed over 5 tons in traveling configuration, requiring substantial tractors for movement and considerable time for emplacement. The gun's height, necessary for anti-aircraft work, made it conspicuous and difficult to conceal in anti-tank positions. The crew of 11 men required to operate the gun for anti-aircraft missions proved excessive for anti-tank work, but reflected the weapon's original design purpose. Most critically, 88mm guns remained desperately needed for their primary mission of air defense. The Luftwaffe operated fewer than 3,000 88mm anti-aircraft guns across all theaters in mid-1941, insufficient even for protecting German cities and military installations from air attack. Diverting these weapons to anti-tank roles meant accepting increased vulnerability to Soviet air attacks, a trade-off that became increasingly costly as the war continued. Nevertheless, Urgent necessity forced widespread employment of 88mm guns in anti-tank roles throughout the summer and fall of 1941. German forces established defense positions anchored on 88mm guns that could engage Soviet armor at ranges where T-34 seconds could not effectively return fire. These positions channeled Soviet attacks into kill zones, where concentrated fire from multiple 88s could destroy T-34 seconds before they closed to effective engagement range. The effectiveness was undeniable. Individual 88mm guns in favorable positions destroyed multiple T-34 seconds in single engagements, with some crews claiming 10 or more kills during major Soviet attacks. The psychological effect on German forces was immediate and powerful, restoring confidence that had been badly shaken by encounters with invulnerable Soviet tanks. However, the 88mm solution revealed as many problems as it solved, particularly regarding engagement ranges and ammunition performance under combat conditions. The claim that 88mm guns routinely destroyed T-34 seconds at ranges approaching or exceeding 1,000 meters requires careful examination against documented battlefield conditions and actual engagement. Data. Theoretical maximum effective range, calculated from ballistic tables under ideal conditions, often bore little resemblance to practical combat performance. The 88mm Panzer 39 armor-piercing shell could theoretically penetrate T-34 frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, given perfect perpendicular impact against a stationary target, under optimal visibility conditions. Combat rarely provided such ideal circumstances. Dust, smoke, vegetation, and terrain features limited visibility to a few hundred meters in most engagements. Moving targets presented tracking challenges that degraded accuracy significantly beyond 500 meters. The high velocity of 88mm shells, while beneficial for penetration, created extremely flat trajectories that made ranging errors catastrophic. A range estimation error of just 50 meters at 1,000 meters could result in shells passing completely over or striking short of low-profile targets like T-34 seconds. German gunners trained primarily for anti-aircraft work lacked extensive experience in ground target engagement at long ranges. Anti-aircraft gunnery involved tracking predictable flight paths and using sophisticated mechanical computing devices to calculate lead angles and fuse settings. Anti-tank gunnery required different skills, including rapid range estimation, target identification in cluttered environments, and tracking unpredictably, maneuvering targets partially concealed by terrain. More critically, the armor-piercing shells available to 88mm guns in 1941 and early 1942 exhibited significant quality control problems that degraded performance under combat conditions. The Panzer 39 shell used a ballistic cap to improve penetration against sloped armor, but the cap frequently separated from the main body during flight at maximum ranges, substantially reducing penetration capability. The armor-piercing core itself, manufactured from hardened steel, sometimes shattered on impact against T-34 armor rather than penetrating cleanly, particularly when striking at angles approaching the limits of the shell's penetration capability. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Documented engagement reports from multiple German units operating 88mm guns in anti-tank roles reveal the gap between theoretical and practical performance. The 11th Panzer Division, operating in southern Ukraine through July and August 1941, maintained detailed records of 88mm gun engagements against Soviet armor. Analysis of 187 documented engagements, where 88mm guns fired at identified T-34 targets, shows actual engagement ranges clustered heavily between 300 and 600 meters, with median engagement range of approximately 450 meters. Only 12 engagements occurred at ranges the crews estimated exceeded 800 meters. Of these, 7 resulted in confirmed T-34 destructions, 3 resulted in hits without apparent significant damage, and 2 resulted in complete misses. The reduced success rate at extended ranges reflected multiple factors, including range estimation errors, reduced accuracy at maximum range, and reduced penetration capability as shells lost velocity. The report noted specific instances where shells that should theoretically have defeated T-34 armor failed to penetrate or caused only superficial damage. In one engagement near Uman on July 31st, an 88mm gun engaged a T-34 at an estimated range of 700 meters. The first shot struck the glacis plate but failed to penetrate, leaving a crater in the armor approximately 15mm deep. The second shot, aimed at the same impact point, hoping to defeat armor weakened by the first hit, also failed to penetrate. The third shot struck the turret ring area and achieved penetration, disabling the tank and forcing the crew to abandon. Post-battle examination of the T-34 revealed the two glacis plate hits had struck at angles approaching 65 degrees from perpendicular, the extreme limit of the PZGR-39 shell's penetration capability. The armor had deformed but not fractured, and the armor-piercing core had shattered on impact rather than penetrating. The ballistic cap showed evidence of separation before impact, further reducing penetration potential. The successful turret ring hit had struck a structural weak point at nearly perpendicular angle, achieving penetration not through superior shell performance, but through hitting an inherently vulnerable area. Similar patterns appeared in records from other units. The 3rd Panzer Division, operating northeast of Smolensk in August 1941, reported multiple instances of 88mm shells, failing to defeat T-34 frontal armor at ranges exceeding 500 meters. One particularly detailed report described an engagement on August 14th, where an 88mm gun position engaged 3 T-34 seconds, advancing across open terrain. The gun crew estimated range at approximately 800 meters and commenced firing. The first 4 shots all struck the lead T-34's glacis plate without achieving penetration, though each impact was clearly visible through the gun sight. The T-34, apparently undamaged, continued advancing and began returning fire, though at that range its shots fell short. As the T-34 closed to approximately 400 meters, the gun crew achieved a penetrating hit through the glacis plate that detonated the ammunition and destroyed the tank immediately. The engagement report included a critical observation from the gun commander. At extended ranges approaching or exceeding 800 meters, the flat trajectory of 88mm shells, combined with the T-34's low profile, created significant ranging challenges. Small errors in range estimation resulted in shells passing completely over the target or striking ground short. The combination of ranging difficulty, reduced penetration at maximum range, and the T-34's effective armor scheme meant that crew confidence in achieving kills beyond 600 meters remained limited, regardless of theoretical penetration capability. Wehrmacht technical intelligence services recognized these performance limitations and initiated comprehensive studies of captured T-34 seconds to understand both the tank's vulnerabilities and the factors limiting German anti-tank effectiveness. The most detailed examination occurred at the Kummersdorf proving grounds near Berlin, where intact T-34 seconds captured during the initial advances underwent extensive ballistic testing through late 1941 and early 1942. Engineers fired 88mm armor-piercing shells at captured T-34 hulls from varying ranges and impact angles, meticulously documenting penetration results. The testing confirmed what field reports had indicated. Against T-34 frontal armor struck at the 60-degree slope angle, reliable penetration with PZGR-39 shells required ranges below approximately 500 to 600 meters. Beyond that distance, penetration became increasingly uncertain, dependent on precise impact angles, shell quality variations, and armor hardness variations in the specific target area struck. The testing revealed specific vulnerabilities that field crews could exploit. The turret ring area, where the turret joined the hull, presented a weak point vulnerable to penetration at extended ranges. The driver's vision port, though small, represented another vulnerable area. The turret cheeks, particularly on early production T-34 seconds, used armor plates welded at angles less extreme than the glacis plate, offering improved penetration probability. These findings were disseminated to combat units through technical bulletins, but exploiting small, vulnerable areas required exceptional gunnery skill and favorable engagement conditions rarely present in actual combat. The fundamental conclusion remained unchanged. The 88mm gun could defeat T-34 armor reliably, but primarily at ranges below 600 meters, distances at which the tactical advantages of long-range engagement largely disappeared. At those ranges, T-34 seconds could return fire effectively, Soviet anti-tank guns posed serious threats, and infantry could attempt close assaults on gun positions. The 88mm provided a solution to the T-34 problem, but not the decisive long-range advantage German doctrine required. More troubling from the German perspective, 88mm gun availability remained severely limited. Total production of all 88mm anti-aircraft guns, including the FlaK 36, FlaK 37, and later FlaK 41 variants, never exceeded approximately 20,000 units throughout the entire war. The GREs, vast majority remained in air defense roles, protecting German cities, industrial facilities, and military installations from increasingly intensive Allied bombing campaigns. The number available for anti-tank work on the Eastern Front represented a small fraction of total production, insufficient to equip more than a small percentage of frontline units. By late 1941, German armaments planners recognized that the 88mm gun, while effective, could not serve as the primary solution to the T-34 threat due to its limited availability, deployment challenges, and the continuing necessity of maintaining air defenses. The solution required developing purpose-built anti-tank weapons capable of defeating T-34 armor at tactically useful ranges, while being available in quantities sufficient to equip frontline units comprehensively. This realization drove multiple parallel development programs. The Wehrmacht urgently requested improved tank guns capable of defeating T-34 frontal armor. The Panzer IV, already in production as an infantry support vehicle, received priority for upgunning with a long-barreled 75mm gun, offering armor-piercing capability comparable to the 88mm, but in a more tactically mobile platform. The development program moved with unusual speed for German procurement processes, driven by field commanders' urgent reports about the inadequacy of existing equipment. The KOK 40 liters, 43 gun, a 75mm weapon with a barrel length of 43 calibers, entered production in early 1942. Testing demonstrated penetration capability of approximately 96mm at 500 meters at 0 degrees obliquity, sufficient to defeat T-34 frontal armor at combat ranges under favorable conditions. The gun equipped the Panzer IV Ossif F2, later redesignated Ossif G, transforming Germany's infantry support tank into a capable tank destroyer. Production began in April 1942, with the first 75mm armed Panzer IVs reaching frontline units in May. Initial deliveries remained limited, with total production through the end of 1942 reaching only approximately 850 vehicles, inadequate to re-equip existing Panzer IV units fully, while also replacing combat losses and supporting expanding armoured divisions. The majority of German tanks throughout 1942 still carried guns inadequate against T-34 frontal armour, forcing continued reliance on tactical expedients and scarce 88mm guns. Parallel development proceeded on purpose-built tank destroyers mounting anti-tank guns on tracked chassis, combining the mobility necessary for modern warfare with firepower adequate to defeat heavy armour. The Marder series of tank destroyers, mounting captured Soviet 76.2mm guns or German 75mm Pak-40 anti-tank guns on various tracked chassis, entered service through 1942. These vehicles provided improved mobility compared to towed anti-tank guns, but suffered from high silhouettes, minimal armour protection for crews, and the use of obsolete chassis that limited cross-country performance. The Sturmgeschütz 3 assault gun, originally designed for infantry support, received upgunning priority similar to the Panzer IV. The long-barreled 75mm Stuk 40 gun provided penetration capability matching the Panzer IV, while the assault gun's lower profile and simpler production made it an attractive interim solution. Production ramped up substantially through 1942, with approximately 800 vehicles mounting the long 75mm gun delivered by year's end. These developments, while necessary and ultimately effective, required time to design, produce, and distribute to frontline units. Throughout 1942 and into early 1943, substantial portions of German armoured and anti-tank forces still relied on weapons inadequate against T-34 frontal armour. The tactical adaptations forced by this equipment inadequacy shaped German defensive doctrine on the Eastern Front, emphasizing the use of terrain, camouflage, and concentrated fire to compensate for individual weapon limitations. German defensive tactics evolved to channel Soviet attacks into carefully prepared kill zones where multiple anti-tank weapons could achieve concentrated fire against advancing T-34 seconds. These positions typically featured carefully surveyed firing lanes with pre-calculated ranges marked by inconspicuous terrain features. Anti-tank guns positioned in depth provided overlapping fields of fire, ensuring that Soviet tanks that survived initial engagement ran into secondary positions before breaking through completely. The 88mm guns, when available, anchored these defensive systems, positioned to cover the most dangerous approach routes where their superior range and penetration provided maximum advantage. The limited numbers available meant that commanders had to choose carefully which sectors to cover with 88s, versus relying on less capable but more numerous 50mm and 75mm weapons. The tactical effectiveness of these defensive systems varied widely depending on terrain, visibility conditions, Soviet tactical skill, and the specific mix of German weapons available. When conditions favored the defense, properly positioned German anti-tank guns achieved impressive results, destroying multiple T-34 seconds while suffering minimal losses. However, these successes depended heavily on Soviet mistakes and favorable circumstances rather than German equipment superiority. Soviet forces gradually adapted their tactics to reduce German defensive advantages. Rather than conducting frontal attacks across open terrain toward obvious German positions, Soviet commanders increasingly employed artillery preparation to suppress known German positions before tank attacks. They used terrain more effectively to approach German lines under cover, emerging at close ranges where German weapons' advantages diminished. They concentrated forces at selected breakthrough points rather than spreading attacks evenly along fronts, accepting that some German positions would remain intact if breakthrough forces could penetrate deeply enough to unhinge defensive lines. Most critically, Soviet tank production vastly exceeded German capacity to destroy T-34 seconds even under favorable circumstances. Soviet industry produced approximately 12,500 tons, 34 seconds in 1942 alone, compared to approximately 4,000 German tanks of all types. This production differential meant that even highly successful German defensive operations that destroyed Soviet tanks at favorable loss ratios ultimately failed to prevent Soviet numerical superiority from growing steadily throughout the war. The engagement data from 1942 reveals the practical limitations of German anti-tank weapons, including the vaunted 88mm gun. Analysis of German loss reports and Soviet tank production versus loss figures demonstrates that German forces destroyed approximately 15,000 Soviet tanks of all types during 1942, including both combat losses and vehicles abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel exhaustion during retreats. This seemingly impressive figure represented less than Soviet production for that single year, meaning that Soviet tank strength actually increased despite heavy losses. More specifically, examination of German claims for T-34 kills versus documented T-34 losses reveals significant discrepancies typical of combat reporting from all nations. German units claimed approximately 8,000 tons, 3-4 kills, during 1942, while Soviet records document approximately 5,500 tons, 3-4 total losses including combat damage, mechanical breakdown, and abandonment. The gap between claims and actual losses reflected common problems, including multiple units claiming credit for destroying the same tank, counting disabled tanks as destroyed when they were later recovered and repaired, and optimistic assessment of combat damage in chaotic battlefield conditions. Among documented T-34 losses where cause of destruction could be determined, 88mm gun hits accounted for approximately 11%, roughly 600 vehicles. This represented less than 5% of total T-34 production for that year, demonstrating that even Germany's most effective anti-tank weapon achieved only marginal impact on overall Soviet tank strength. The vast majority of T-34 losses resulted from other causes, including Panzer IV long 75mm guns, close-range hits from 50mm guns achieving flank shots, infantry close assault, air attack, mechanical failure, or abandonment due to fuel exhaustion. The mythology that developed around the 88mm gun's effectiveness against Soviet armor, while based on real tactical successes, significantly overstated its strategic impact. Individual 88mm guns in favorable positions could and did destroy multiple T-34 seconds in single engagements, creating memorable incidents that featured prominently in unit histories and personal memoirs. These exceptional cases, however, represented rare combinations of superior equipment, skilled crews, favorable terrain, and Soviet tactical mistakes rather than typical combat performance. The broader pattern revealed in comprehensive analysis of engagement data shows that German anti-tank defense throughout 1942 and into 1943 relied less on superior equipment and more on superior tactical skill, effective use of terrain, and the consistent pattern of Soviet tactical errors that partially offset Soviet material advantages. When Soviet forces attacked carefully prepared German positions frontally across open terrain with inadequate artillery preparation and poor coordination between armor and infantry, German defenders achieved favorable outcomes despite equipment limitations. When Soviet forces employed effective combined arms tactics with thorough artillery preparation, concentrated attacks at selected breakthrough points, and proper coordination between tanks and infantry, German defensive positions collapsed regardless of whether they included 88mm guns. The equipment gap, while real, mattered less than tactical competence, with superior German tactical performance compensating for inferior equipment through much of 1942. This tactical compensation became progressively more difficult to maintain as Soviet tactical proficiency improved through hard experience, and German tactical advantages eroded as combat losses depleted veteran units. By late 1942 and early 1943, Soviet operations demonstrated increasing sophistication in areas including artillery employment, combined arms coordination, exploitation of breakthroughs, and deception operations. German forces could no longer rely on Soviet mistakes to offset equipment disadvantages. The winter offensive of 1942 to 1943, culminating in the encirclement and destruction of German Sixth Army at Stalingrad, demonstrated dramatically how improved Soviet tactical performance combined with numerical superiority overcame German defensive efforts despite local successes by individual units. German anti-tank defenses, including 88mm gun positions, destroyed hundreds of Soviet tanks during the operation, but could not prevent the ultimate breakthrough and encirclement that decided the campaign. The post-Stalingrad period marked a fundamental shift in the war's trajectory on the Eastern Front. German forces transitioned from offensive operations aimed at decisive victory to defensive operations aimed at preserving combat capability, while inflicting maximum casualties on Soviet forces. This defensive emphasis theoretically played to German strengths in positional warfare and anti-tank defense, but the continuing equipment gap and growing Soviet tactical proficiency limited the effectiveness of purely defensive strategies. The Battle of Kursk in July 1943 represented Germany's final attempt to regain operational initiative through offensive action. The operation involved the most powerful German armoured force assembled to that point, including substantial numbers of improved Panzer IVs with long 75mm guns, new Panther medium tanks with even more powerful guns, and Tiger heavy tanks mounting 88mm guns in fully armoured, mobile platforms. The offensive failed to achieve its objectives despite local tactical successes and favourable loss ratios in many engagements. Soviet defensive preparations, informed by intelligence regarding German attack plans, created defensive depth that absorbed German attacks without catastrophic breakthrough. Soviet forces accepted heavy losses while inflicting unsustainable damage on irreplaceable German armoured units, demonstrating that numerical superiority combined with adequate defensive doctrine could defeat even significantly superior German equipment and tactical skill. The T-34's role in this victory reflected less its individual technical superiority over German opponents, which had largely disappeared by mid-1943 as improved German tanks entered service, and more its availability in overwhelming numbers that German forces could not match. Soviet industry produced approximately 15,700 tons, 34 seconds during 1943, while German production of all tank types totaled approximately 10,700 vehicles. This production gap, combined with Germany's multi-front commitments, meant that numerical advantage on the Eastern Front continued growing regardless of tactical success. The evolution of German anti-tank capabilities through 1943 and 1944 produced weapons technically superior to the 88mm gun in anti-tank roles. The long 75mm gun in various mountings provided comparable penetration in more mobile, easier-to-conceal platforms. The 88mm gun mounted in Tiger and King Tiger tanks combined superior penetration with heavy armor protection and tactical mobility. The Park 43 88mm anti-tank gun, specifically designed for anti-tank work rather than adapted from anti-aircraft use, provided improved performance in a lower-profile mounting. None of these developments altered the fundamental strategic reality. Germany lacked industrial capacity to produce advanced weapons in quantities sufficient to offset Soviet numerical superiority. Each Tiger tank, while individually far superior to the T-34's most technical measures, required manufacturing resources equivalent to approximately 3 Panzer IVs or 5 Stug II. German industry produced approximately 1,350 Tigers total throughout the war, compared to approximately 58,000 tons 34 seconds of all variants produced by Soviet industry. The mathematics were brutally simple. German tactical skill and superior equipment could achieve favorable loss ratios, destroying more Soviet tanks than they lost in return, but could not destroy Soviet tanks faster than Soviet industry replaced them, while simultaneously replacing German losses. Every Tiger destroyed in combat represented an irreplaceable asset. Every destroyed T-34 was replaced by 2 or 3 fresh vehicles within weeks. The mythology surrounding the 88mm gun's effectiveness, while understandable given its genuine tactical impact in specific circumstances, obscures this fundamental strategic reality. The 88mm gun provided German forces with a weapon capable of defeating any Allied tank at tactically useful ranges, but this capability influenced individual battles rather than campaign outcomes. Strategic success required not just superior weapons but superior industrial capacity to produce weapons in decisive quantities, superior logistics to deliver them to combat units and maintain them in operation, and sufficient trained personnel to crew them effectively. Germany possessed none of these strategic advantages after mid-1942. The 88mm gun's tactical effectiveness highlighted rather than resolved this fundamental problem, providing a weapon that could win engagements but not campaigns, destroy individual enemy tanks but not alter production balances, achieve tactical success but not strategic victory. The German soldiers who manned 88mm guns in anti-tank positions throughout the Eastern Front demonstrated exceptional courage and skill, often achieving remarkable results against overwhelming odds. Their tactical successes, documented in countless engagement reports and personal accounts, reflected genuine accomplishment worthy of recognition. These individual and small unit achievements, however, occurred within a strategic context that rendered them ultimately futile. No amount of tactical skill or weapon effectiveness could overcome the fundamental imbalance in industrial capacity between Germany and the combined Allied powers. The 88mm gun's reputation as the ultimate anti-tank weapon of World War II, while justified by its technical capabilities and documented combat performance, inadvertently reinforces a misunderstanding about what determined the war's outcome. The war was decided not by superior weapons or superior soldiers, but by superior industrial systems, producing adequate weapons in overwhelming quantities, superior logistics, delivering those weapons to frontline units consistently, and adequate tactical doctrine that allowed numerically superior forces to accept heavy losses while inflicting unsustainable attrition on qualitatively superior opponents. The T-34, far more than the 88mm gun, exemplified this winning formula. The Soviet tank was technically adequate rather than exceptional, but available in quantities that overwhelmed German defensive capacity, regardless of local tactical superiority. Its relatively simple design enabled rapid production and field repair, ensuring high availability rates despite mechanical problems that would have sidelined more sophisticated vehicles. Its armor protection and firepower proved sufficient to accomplish assigned missions, even when opposed by technically superior German weapons, because tactical adequacy, combined with numerical superiority, achieved strategic objectives that individual technical superiority could not. The lessons learned through the collision between T-34 seconds and German anti-tank weapons, including the 88mm gun, influenced post-war military thinking across multiple nations. Soviet doctrine for decades afterward emphasized mass production of adequate weapons over small-scale production of technically sophisticated equipment, a direct continuation of the approach that proved successful in World War II. American tank development, influenced by similar lessons about the strategic value of reliability and mass production over individual technical superiority, produced designs like the M60 and later M1 Abrams that combined technical sophistication with production feasibility. German military tradition, preserved through the Bundeswehr after West Germany's rearmament, retained emphasis on crew training and tactical excellence, but explicitly acknowledged that these advantages required support from adequate industrial capacity and logistics. The Leopard 1 and Leopard 2 tank designs reflected lessons about balancing technical sophistication with production feasibility, reliability, and maintainability. The engagement between T-34 seconds and 88mm guns during World War II represents not a story of superior German weapons defeating superior Soviet numbers, as popular mythology sometimes suggests, but rather the complex reality of how tactical capabilities interacted with strategic resources to determine military outcomes. German tactical and technical advantages proved real but insufficient. Soviet numerical advantages, enabled by industrial capacity and strategic resource access, proved decisive, despite heavy costs and tactical setbacks. The title question of whether 88mm guns failed at 500 yards requires nuanced understanding. The guns did not fail mechanically or technically at that range. They achieved penetration capability adequate to defeat T-34 armor reliably at 500 meters, and often at greater distances under favorable conditions. The failure, to the extent one occurred, was strategic rather than tactical. The 88mm gun's undeniable effectiveness in individual engagements could not overcome Germany's fundamental strategic disadvantages in industrial capacity, resource access, and multi-front commitments. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.